So it is back-to-back for Jannik Sinner in Melbourne Park, and very much like our most recent major prior to this one at the US Open last year, his brilliance, him being a buzzsaw on hard courts, sort of sapped away any semblance of suspense for this tournament, particularly in week 2. And yeah, with the great ones, once they get in that zone, once they're on the sort of generational run that Jannik has been on for the past nearing 1.5 years, they do have a tendency of just looking untouchable like that. And with so many of us intently looking on, seeing if there was any room this fortnight for a slip-up on Sinner's part for a guy who had a hardcore season last year that really doesn't have that much room to get that much better. And just as he has every step of this generational hardcore run, he just kept his head down, kept it chugging, and stayed seemingly immune to any type of pressure the expectations can come about. I mean, we've seen this every step of the way, like I said. I mean, last year, so many guys tend to have, a little bit of a letdown immediately after getting that first major hurdle over with. But here was Sinner a couple weeks later, took out Rotterdam, Miami soon after, and then, his summer on the natural surfaces had its complications, physically getting ill, still not seeming 100% when he returned to North America, but navigated that just fine. Cincinnati title. Soon after that, of course, the whole whirlwind around with his positive tests being made public, and all sorts of discourse hanging over that immediately after at the US Open, only to go win the US Open sort of on cruise control to the tune of just 2 sets dropped, and of course topped it off with, another dominant fall season indoors and in Asia. And yeah, I mean, this Australian Open title, pretty reminiscent of that US Open title. I felt like, he was playing average for himself, but that is not a critique. In fact, it's a testament to just where he is relative to the field right now, particularly on hard courts. I mean, his average level, it's going to blow out, pretty much everybody that isn't in Tier 1 as far as, the game's hierarchy right now on hard courts. And even so, this final, he did blow out a guy that, you would have to say is Tier 1 in Zverev right now. Fitness is obviously one thing, and that's, the only place right now where, the question isn't completely answered, because the last couple times we've seen Sinner dragged into a 5th set in best of 5, albeit, not on his best surface at Wimbledon and the French last year, where, as I mentioned earlier, he already wasn't 100%, but in both, he still seemed knackered there at the end, down the stretch in both matches. But, on the plane that he is operating at right now, nobody's been able to push Jannik Sinner into, a physical war, a test of fitness. I thought Zverev might be able to, but obviously that didn't happen. And I mean, especially along the way when he was ailing against Holger, that middle chunk of that match really was the only time he was in any sort of danger throughout this Australian Open run. Seemed to be ill during that match as well, and then the heat as well contributed with that match being played during the day. But, being the champion that he is, he dug in, that epic point to save a break point, I think at 1-all early in the 3rd set, seemed to give the second wind. And then again, he seemed to be dealing with cramps in the 3rd set against Shelton in a match that was at night, that wasn't all that physical. So, I was kind of raising my eyebrow at that going into the final. But when every other question is answered and you're so good right now that, the question can't really be posed of your physicality, that's like the least damaging concern, half concern at that, you can have. And you look elsewhere, and other than that, the strat just isn't clear on what to do with him. over the last year, he's just gotten to a place where there's not really anywhere to hide. The ball striking was always there, obviously. I don't know that I've seen somebody improve movement so drastically, so quickly, ever. Some of the defense, particularly some of the sliding, open stance, backhand passes, very reminiscent of you-know-who, Novak Djokovic. I mean, Zverev in press also noted how similar it feels playing, playing Novak. And yeah, I mean, he is a threat to do damage from pretty much anywhere on the court right now. At the beginning of this run, fall of 2023, it was evident, how much more variety he was trying to employ. I said back then it really looked like the auxiliary parts in his game, around the innate elite ball striking he came with out of the box, was beginning to take shape in his game, where, you were having to respect the threat of a drop shot. It wasn't just a linear power as much. And yeah, now fast forward a little over a year, and particularly that forehand drop shot, not only do you have to respect the threat of it, but it's a whole ass weapon now. And that was a feature of this lopsided final win, where, of course he took advantage of Sasha's court position so many times, whether it was dragging him out with his serve out wide, or just keeping Zverev honest from, dropping back. And also just, drawing Sasha in, taking advantage of his volleys, which, despite improved, still, as we saw in this final, can be a bit of an undoing. And yeah, I mean, it's in such stark contrast to how Jannik was dealing with, the elite backboarders, pace absorbers in Zverev and Medvedev, two of Jannik's most problematic matchups, all the way back to pretty much immediately preceding his ascent in the fall of 2023, as Zverev beat him at the Open, really was able to, drag him into a physical battle there, test the fitness, and come out on top. And, obviously the shackles have been broken in both those head-to-heads. He's, flipped the Medvedev one on its head with Sasha after winning their first match at Roland Garros in 2020. He had been the loser of the last four, and then, now Sinner 2.0. Looks very intent on turning the tide in this head-to-head in his favor as well. And even between, I guess, most of 2024, we saw maybe the best version of him at the last tournament on the ATP in 2024, when the serve was really firing on all cylinders in Torino. And I believe early in this tournament in Australia, he had said that he had sort of tinkered with the motion on all his shots ever so slightly, made sure to isolate the serve as well. And I thought to the eye, that was apparent, obviously, in this final against a guy who is as tough and out as Zverev has been over the last couple of years in these majors. Sasha was unable to even conjure a break point against Jannik, and Sinner, was sitting at over 80%. I think it was 84% first serve points won for the match. And in, some of these quasi-pressure moments where maybe an opening was there for Zverev to get back into this match, it really was the serve that was the main feature that got him out of trouble. You saw Love 30 at 5-6, Zverev 2 points from the set, and Sinner responded with 3 straight first serves that, set him up either for an easy put away or were flat out service winners / aces. And then again, of course, set point after the let cord. But yeah, I mean, cool as a cucumber, serve out wide, and, put the forehand on a dime. up the line to seal that set and pretty much take all the air out of the building. And yeah, I mean, when you're that good technically, mentally, in the clutch, and somehow only seemingly improving, that's definitely a very scary prospect. And when you look across the horizon right now, as I said, he's figured out the Medvedev head-to-head, as Medvedev's form has been dipping as well over the last couple months. He is in the midst of flipping the Zverev head-to-head. He has won 4 of his last 5 against Novak. And right now, Alcaraz on surfaces that would favor Sinner, not Alcaraz, is not making it to Sinner often enough to really ask those questions. And even though I do feel that Sasha Zverev is capable of putting in much greater resistance and a much better showing than he did in the final, ultimately he is correct when he said his assessment at the end of the match that, Sinner is, just better than me. Now, do you want to hear that out of a guy that is number 2 in the world, gunning to complete the last piece of the puzzle in his career with that elusive major win? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But that is the state of affairs right now, and the rest, don't really have a chance against him, quite frankly, on the hard courts. At least not until further notice, and like all of us anticipate, that Sinner in short order is going to start producing more on the natural surfaces. Obviously not that his results have been poor by any stretch on either surface, really. I mean, he made his first big splash making the quarterfinals at Roland Garros, testing Rafa Nadal on Chatrier. Wasn't that far from a final, last year at Roland Garros as well. Also been a semifinalist at Wimbledon, won Halle last year, 2 sets up on Djokovic as well a couple years ago, etc., etc. Health permitting, it is inevitable that he's going to start giving himself chances to win all the biggest prizes on those surfaces as well very, very soon. And quite frankly, he's in a great spot. He finds himself in a great spot. I think Alcaraz also finds himself in a great spot for, the reason that right now at their best, you look across the landscape of tennis at the moment, and it is soon to be 38-year-old Novak Djokovic as pretty much the only one aside from each other that possesses the top-end level to actually get over the line. When it comes to getting over the line against either one of them in their favorite conditions or courts. That too, 38-year-old Novak now at a place where, he can't just summon up that top-end level whenever he pleases, and a guy who's getting injured a whole lot more often, and we don't particularly know how he bounces back. It's not always a given at this age. But at the moment, that does seem to be the state of affairs. Your initial next-gen guys weren't threatening that much as it is, and now they're either plateauing or in decline, seemingly. And certainly this tournament showed that, the incoming younger generation is making strides quickly, but, probably at least require a little bit more time to get to that level. And, on that note, a word on Sasha Zverev. Until that final, in my eyes, he continued to be one of those guys that can hang with either one of Sinner or Alcaraz, and by proxy, hang with pretty much everybody, because, that's what Zverev has been. He has been a lock to be competitive with whoever it is that's on the other side of the net, on pretty much any court that isn't a grass court. That, of course, pertaining to Zverev ever since, he got over his slam woes early in his career, I would say, as of 2020 and beyond. But even with that being said, in a big spot against a marquee player, you just do not trust Sasha Zverev to get over the line. until we hear game, set, match Zverev in those spots. And technically, we did hear it this tournament against Novak in the semis, but there's no reason to believe that it would have happened under normal conditions because Zverev was gagging that entire first set before the retirement happened. And as for the final, this was a blast from the past from Zverev's end, and that is not in a good way at all. I mention his woes and slams from 2017 to 2019. Well, this was a match, aside from the second serve yips, it was very reminiscent of that period because he was dismal. He was flat from the jump. The tentative, pushy forehand was on display all night. And normally when it gets cagey, at least he's making the ball in the court. That wasn't happening. He was playing, with complete passivity on everything other than the serve. And not only was there no depth or pop behind the shots, but both wings were leaking unforced errors for his standards. And so just getting a look at that, I felt very early on in this match, just off of the vibes, that if Zverev couldn't stay connected on serve, this could get away from him and see a straight set loss. And, quite frankly, this could have been something along the lines of 6-1, 6-4, 6-3 if that serve hadn't bailed him out of a couple tough holds. And, like I touched upon earlier, I don't love what he said at the end of this match. To me, the whole "I'm not good enough" was a cop-out. It sounded like a cop-out. Because, like I said earlier, yes, Jannik Sinner is a better player than you, but you have demonstrated time and time again that you are capable of sticking with anybody. And while he is better, he's not that much better. Where if you hadn't just completely face-palmed, this was over 40 unforced errors in a match where I think he only hit 2 double faults. That was straight sets. All the while, half of your winners were aces. I would almost understand those comments more if he had barely lost. It makes more sense to me if he put something resembling his best foot forward and it wasn't good enough. To perform the way that he did in this final and, I don't want to say tried to elicit sympathy, but, that's how it read. And that's been a trend with Zverev and what he says. It totally reads as a lack of accountability between how he and his team discussed Roland Garros 2022 if he hadn't got injured, between his eruption with Moleani in Shanghai last year, and now this, it's just sort of throwing a pity party for yourself. And I don't think after that final that that's something that he is worthy of. And, considering how out of character it was with how Zverev's usually a great battler, he's very good when he's behind the 8-ball, and a terrible closer, with how much of an outlier this finals performance was to that, and also just how defeated the body language looked from basically the end of the second set through the trophy ceremony. I do wonder if he's gotten to the point where Tsitsipas got ever since that 2023 Australian Open, where continually taking your lumps to, these generational players, both old and now the future in Sinner Alcaraz. I do wonder whether it's gotten to a point where the scar tissue continually coming up short now deflates rather than motivates. But yeah, we'll have to wait and watch on that front. Of course, he'll have another great shot on the clay where he is still a tier 1 guy, and I would say the window is still slightly open, though it is probably quickly closing on whether Zverev wins a major, especially now as it appears that Sinner has entered his prime. Alcaraz maybe a ways away from getting there as well. And so while that is still the case, he's definitely gonna have to pounce if it is going to happen sometime very soon. But in the meantime, with Sunshine double around the corner, it is still Jannik Sinner's world, and we are just living in it. At the beginning of this season, a lot of us were going off historical precedent that it is really, really hard to repeat all-time great seasons back-to-back. And Jannik Sinner has certainly started his 2025 in the best possible way in an attempt to buck that trend this season. And yeah, with his game in the place that it is right now, it's just so sustainable, so repeatable. He's in as good a position as anybody there's been lately in doing just that. So with that, congratulations to Jannik Sinner. Of course, the winner of your last 3 hardcourt majors now, and his reign over the cement continues down under in Melbourne with seemingly no end in sight.